Yo, what's going on, guys? Crispy Flakes here. Welcome to Extra Crispy. So this video was highly requested by you guys in the comment section. Video by my guy Barry McCockiner titled Overrated, Underrated, or Properly Rated. So we are going to be given a series of players in sports, and I'm going to tell you guys, what their rating is, in my opinion. So it's going to be a mixing of NBA players, but also other sports, which, I think I have basic knowledge about. So it should be pretty good, man. Also, over on my other channel, Crispy Flakes, I literally, found legitimate proof that the 2022 NBA draft lottery was rigged. Go check out that video, man. If you're a San Antonio Spurs fan, all I gotta say is, I apologize, man. Let's check this out.
I asked my subscribers to name any athlete, past or present, so
Okay.
I can make a video where I determine whether or not they are overrated, underrated, or properly rated.
Makes
Before
sense.
I begin, I want to state there's no real order to this. I just took what I thought were the most interesting suggestions. Let's begin.
Let's do
You
it.
Sold the Bag says, Paul Pierce. A lot of people have mixed feelings about him, but I think you're of the age.
Paul Pierce is underrated. Paul Pierce was one of the great scoring small forwards during his era. He was loyal for the most part to the Boston Celtics. He was trading everything, right? So it's like, Paul Pierce was a great player. The issue is that in the media now, he's said so many stupid takes and has, talked the talk, whether to walk the walk and stuff like that, man. To the extent of it's just like, he has overrated himself. Paul Pierce has overrated himself, but as an actual player, he is underrated. But he has overrated himself, if that makes sense.
Age in which you watched him for most of his career, so what do you think? Well, I think most people realize Pierce was very good and even great for a few years, but not in the upper echelon with guys like LeBron, Kobe, Duncan, Durant, or Steph. Remember when he allegedly shit his pants in a finals game, though? That was pretty funny. My verdict? Properly rated.
Okay.
The Tank 564 says, Gary
Payton. I think Gary Payton's properly rated. I think we recognize him as a really, really, really good point guard of his time. But, like with Paul Pierce, nobody's really talking about the greatest point guard of all time. He's not going to be up to Magic Johnson and Steph Curry. He's the tier under that, I would say. Maybe even the tier under that. But I would say properly rated.
Payton, largely talked about as one of the greatest defensive guards of all time, but no one really talks about how his Supersonics teams fell short in the 90s. To me, Payton benefited from playing before social media, so his playoff failures, as alluded to, are largely forgotten about. And he also gets propped up by MJ fans to be a little bit better than he actually was to make MJ's 1996 championship seem more impressive. My verdict? Overrated.
All right.
Fragilistic Falconer asks,
Paul George. I would say that Paul George is underrated. Now, obviously, the goal is to win championships, but at the same time, too, I recognize that Paul George literally snapped his leg in half, and he was able to eventually come back and still be a superstar. He had a really good season with the OKC Thunder. Yes, I'm going to say properly rated. I think we recognize his shortcomings in the playoffs, but you recognize he's still a great player, at least during the regular season. Properly rated.
Paul George. His career has had so many ups and downs that I honestly don't know where to rate him. Well, I believe George was slightly overrated at times in Indiana and Oklahoma City, but actually since coming to the Clippers, he's become such a target for jokes and criticism that I think people actually overlook his talents a little bit now. My verdict? He's underrated, but still a playoff underachiever. Andrew Ramsey asked, Randall Cunningham. Always felt
Randall Cunningham. I don't know who that is, but I do know that his last name's Cunningham, which is Cade. Underrated.
Felt like a bit of an underachiever, but still broke the mold with his ability. Well, in his own words, Randall was pretty lazy early in his career and didn't really study. So it's fair to say he underachieved a bit, but I wouldn't say he's overrated. I think he's rightfully remembered as a good quarterback who had flashes of greatness, but lacked the consistency to be a
damn thing about him.
Properly rated. Mordecai Shikari II asked, Dave Steve. He single-handedly made
baseball viable in Canada and arguably the most underrated pitcher of all time. So he could be I'm going to say if this dude says if he's underrated pitcher of all time, I'm going to say underrated. Just based off of that.
And is arguably the most underrated pitcher of all time. And in terms of stats and performance, was easily the best pitcher of his era. It'd be a travesty not to include him. Well, thanks to John Boy's masterful Dorktown look at Steve's career, his greatness in the 80s has been thrust back into the spotlight a little bit. As his videos outlined in great detail, Steve was robbed of several Cy Youngs, a possible Hall of Fame nomination, and a few no-hitters. He had a great porn stash, too. My verdict? Underrated. Matabs asked, Maurice
Yo, MJD, baby. Yo, I loved Maurice Jones-Drew, man, on the Jaguars. That was like my optimal era of watching football. The dude is underrated, man. Like, I would always get him in fantasy and stuff like that. The dude was short as hell. I think he was like 5'6". He always gave me like good feelings about myself just because like I was really short and everything too. So I was like, I could be an NFL running back. And then the weight hit. No, okay.
Drew, man carried the Jaguars
Underrated.
for so many years, but nobody ever
Underrated.
talks about him anymore. Like in his prime, he was amazing. And I agree, MJD's first 6
Also
seasons
loved
in the league
Brian
all
Westbrook.
ranged from very good to elite. Unfortunately, he played for mostly shitty Jaguars teams and quickly fell off after 2011.
Maybe a
but I
stat
did
pattern?
watch him play at his best, and he certainly was the real deal. Verdict,
Hell yeah.
underrated. Mr. Fuzzy Flippers.
Kurt Warner.
Kurt Warner. It's hard.
Yeah, they actually had Chuck play him in a movie, also known as Shazam. Kurt Warner, I would say properly rated. Maybe a guy that gets lost to history a little bit. Also, if I am mistaken, wasn't it Kurt Warner that went down and then Tom Brady took his spot and then Kurt Warner ended up going to like the Arizona Cardinals for a bit, I believe? Could be wrong about that, but I would say properly
Hard
rated.
for me to say for certain what even I think of his career because he only played maybe 4 or 5 full seasons. Warner only played 4 full seasons, but in those years he won 2
Did he
MVPs,
really?
a Super Bowl MVP, made 3 Super Bowl
Only 4
appearances,
seasons?
including one with the terrible Cardinals franchise. Even in such a small amount of time, that's way more than most quarterbacks can say. I think he's a deserving Hall of Famer, but not an inner circle legend. Verdict, properly rated.
Agreed.
Olio, Lynn Swan, he's in the Hall of Fame despite
Lynn Swan, 116 games, never recording a 1,000-yard season, only making 3 Pro Bowls as a first. That's overrated.
only playing 116
Overrated
games,
as
never
hell,
recording
man.
a 1,000-yard season, and only making 3 Pro Bowls and a first-team All-Pro. I agree with this. Swan is a great example of being in the right place at the right time. He had some memorable catches
Trash.
in the Super Bowl that live on in infamy, but does he deserve to be in the Hall of Fame with such
Stole High
pedestrian
Warren's
numbers?
number 2.
Not to me. Verdict, overrated. The Menegatti asks, John Stockton.
John Stockton, man. Okay, I'm going to call it like it is. John Stockton is properly rated. And the reason I say that is you have a ton of people that underrate John Stockton. You have a ton of people that overrate John Stockton. There is sides to both of the story about how you view him as a point guard and his time in the NBA, with Karl Malone. And I think, therefore, that makes him properly rated, man. So that's how I'm going to go with that.
Lots of people think he is extremely overrated, and some people think he deserves more credit because of his records.
Makes him properly rated to me.
John Stockton gets overrated by MJ fans to make his 2 rings versus Utah seem more impressive. I
Fair.
also think, in general, Stockton is overrated. He wasn't nearly good enough as a scorer to warrant the praise he gets. He was a very good player who played forever to accumulate massive counting stats. Verdict, overrated.
Oh,
Den
man.
says, Vince Carter.
Vince
His legacy
Carter.
is so interesting to me, and I feel like his career is so unique, as he had
Man, Vince Carter is one of those dudes that just like, big part of basketball. I mean, like growing up, man, VC, I still remember sitting in my 7th grade, I think it was chemistry class. I don't know, man. This shit was all the same to me. And I still remember watching out to Sports Center, man, like Vince Carter in the morning dunking on Alonzo Mourning. I was so hyped that people were like, why are you yelling over there, Crispy? And it's like, man, I was so excited. But I will say, he has the longevity thing going for him. But as far as like actual accomplishment, he didn't really do too much, man. Like VC, like I'm putting the basketball stuff aside and just like individually, like how I like viewed him and stuff, and like what he was for me is just like, like one of those dudes you just look like a superhero to you, man. Like way he could jump and everything. But I would say probably overrated though, man. If I'm being honest.
great
I love
longevity
VC
while
too,
being
man,
crazy
but-
athletic. Well, like Stockton, Carter played forever to compile massive counting
Yeah.
stats, but unlike Stockton, Carter isn't viewed as a top 25 to 30 player ever. I think for the most part, people realize he was very good for
That's
about a
true.
decade, then hung on for way too long.
That's
No
true.
offense to Aaron Hernandez. Verdict, properly
Fair.
rated. Alex Von Holten. I'm curious of your opinion on
Brian Urlacher, man. Once again, during the time I was really watching a lot of football, I would say properly rated. Brian Urlacher was a beast. Like, literally, he was like that Bears team, like, defense and everything like that. And he was scary to play against, man. Especially in Detroit. Everybody kind of scary to play against. I'm going to say properly rated, in my opinion, though.
Brian Urlacher, Bears legend, in my opinion. It seems to get
It's a lot
talked
of
about
fun.
less and
Really
less
enjoying
nowadays.
this.
Well, Urlacher is obviously a great player, and his spot in the Hall of Fame was well deserved. He was excellent as a pass coverage linebacker, but he wasn't as tough in run support as he looked. That's just me nitpicking, though. Verdict, properly rated.
Fair.
Yarnball G says Bernard King.
Bernard King, one of the only NBA players to ever come back after an Achilles tear, and still an amazing scorer in the 1980s, underrated in my opinion. I would say Bernard King is definitely a dude that don't really get talked about a lot. I think another player that just gets like lost the time. I'm going to say underrated.
King, one of the only NBA players to ever come back good after an Achilles tear, and was still an amazing scorer in the 1980s. Underrated in my opinion.
Like KD,
King
right?
was an amazing scorer, that much is true, and it's also true he wasn't good at anything else, and his teams usually sucked. If he played today, there's no doubt he'd be called a stat patter, but his best years came in a major market with the Knicks.
Yeah, I'll take your word on it, Barry.
I'll
take your word on it, man.
Overrated.
Okay.
Matthew Nolet says, Wayne Gretzky. He's regarded as the greatest hockey player ever, but with Ovechkin quickly climbing on the all-time score.
All right. So we get to, we have a bit of a maybe like LeBron, Michael Jordan scenario right here. LeBron being great doesn't make MJ overrated. So I'm gonna say right here too, properly rated. Like, somebody else's greatness is a takeaway from somebody else's greatness. Properly rated.
And McDavid being debated as equal or better than Gretzky.
Like Mr. Hockey or something.
Since he played in a very different era. Look, I don't pretend to be a hockey expert, and I know Gretzky played in an era that was more offensive friendly than McDavid, Crosby, and Ovechkin, but come on, there's no way Gretzky can be overrated. His production is so ridiculous, and he checks off every box imaginable. To me, he's rightfully seen as the hockey GOAT. Verdict, properly rated.
Sir.
David writes, Wes Welker, dude did so...
Wes Welker, slot receiver for the Patriots. When I think of that position, I think of Wes Welker as like just like the mold and just like what you want to be at that spot, being like I don't know, man, the dude was like short as hell and stuff, but he was damn stocky. John Stocky. I would say properly rated. Well, I'm gonna say underrated, man. I don't hear him getting talked about enough. Wes Welker was great and very efficient.
Much, and I don't think he ever gets recognized for what he was and could do.
Underrated for sure.
Well, Welker will always be most remembered for dropping a shitty throw by Tom Brady late in Super Bowl 46. He never won a Super Bowl, and his replacement, Julian Edelman, went on to put up great playoff numbers. But yes, Welker was an absolute monster for a good 6 years in New England. I do agree that he's largely forgotten. Verdict, underrated.
All right.
Orba Fat
Gale
says Gale Sayers could have been one of the greatest running backs of all time if his career was not cut short.
Okay, I mean, if he had the injuries, you can't get credit for things you had to actually do. Like, injuries do suck, obviously, but I'm going to leave that as properly rated. Like, yeah, that's properly
Sayers'
rated.
talent was certainly not overrated, but his career is. People like to compare him to Terrell Davis since both are in the Hall of Fame and had short careers. The difference, though, is that Davis had huge playoff success, whereas Sayers never made the playoff. Verdict, overrated. Left or Right says, love the concept idea. Thank you. I would like to hear your opinion on DK Metcalf, especially...
DK Metcalf is underrated just because of his name.
Regarding his potential for a place in the Hall of Fame. Look, Metcalf's a good wide receiver who creates a lot of media attention thanks to his Dragon Ball Z physique. But is he a truly elite wide receiver on track for the Hall of Fame? Not to me. And now that Russell Wilson is gone, I think his stats will nosedive.
Who's the QB in Seattle?
Overrated. Bieber0209 says, Yadier Molina. He is either considered one of the best catchers of all time or one of the most average of all time, depending on who you ask. Either way, the man has been in the league since 2004, and in a sport like baseball, it has to mean something.
Underrated.
Well, most Cardinals fans think Molina is the second coming of Johnny Bench and belongs in the Hall of Fame, but in reality, he's had just 3 good years as a hitter in nearly 2 decades. Yeah, he might catch a good game, but his offense just hasn't been there enough to be a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. Verdict, overrated. Jordan Munns. Bo Jackson. I was always mesmerized by the fact that he played pro in 2 different sports.
I think Bo Jackson is properly rated. I think we recognize the greatness of Bo. Properly rated.
Growing up. Well, much like Gale Sayers, Jackson's talent and athletic ability was off the charts and worth all the praise it receives. But I honestly can't think of another pro athlete who actually accomplished less that gets more attention than Bo Jackson. For Christ's sakes, he has fewer career rushing yards than Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh! Verdict, overrated. Okay. Ryan says, Chris Webber. So much of his career.
Chris Webber, in my opinion, one of the best passing big dudes of all time. Obviously know him mostly from the Sacramento Kings, and as a Michigan fan, little travel scenario, timeout thingy going on. Oh, man. Yeah, Chris Webber doesn't really get talked about a lot. Very athletic player, had a decent mid-range shot and everything. I would say underrated. I don't think C-Webb gets talked about a lot, man.
He was overshadowed by unfortunate moments and mistakes, when in reality,
he was a fantastic
player who had a Hall of Fame-worthy career and should have a ring. I mostly agree with this.
I think C-Webb is the definition of why you need to win a ring. To really be, go down and, be, remembered, years and years down the road.
Never lived down the infamous timeout at Michigan and has since become a much maligned broadcaster for TNT. But even though it's not completely unfair to say he had some struggles in the playoffs, he did have a legitimately great run with the Kings, and he should have won a ring in 2002. Verdict, underrated. Okay, yep. Suggested Tiger says, hey Barry, I know this one may be an obvious request, but he definitely deserves to be on the list.
Got him.
He's nuts. Why would you say that? That is not funny. There are kids watching this. Grow up. Seriously, come on. The poetry god, Chris Paul. A lot of good counting stats and accomplishments.
I mean, we have to go based off what we know now. And we've known for, a lot of people were hoping that CP3 would have been able to get past the Mavericks. And that would have done a lot for his legacy. But that has absolutely solidified Chris Paul as not being able to be that guy in the playoffs. Like, it is. Say what you want about him. But I think everybody knows that now. And I think going into the series, like, maybe you maybe would have said that CP3 was overrated because, like, he was still, it's like he still had not gotten over that hump yet as a player. But now it's just even more like a sure thing. And I think people recognize that now, and I think that makes him properly rated because of that. But, man, a week ago, my answer would have probably been a little bit different.
For the regular season, but not as much playoff success as one would think. I like CP3 and have rooted for him throughout his career, but at this point, yeah, there's really no denying that he just can't be trusted in the playoffs. I feel like he's considered an all-time great, but not the GOAT point guard, which is pretty accurate, though. Verdict, properly rated. Hayes Abdul-Jalil, I hope I'm saying that right. If I'm not, I swear to God.
Draymond Green, people tend to believe that he's either a Hall of Famer or a super overrated system player. Okay, like the term like system player, like, I understand that in some circumstances. I don't think basketball is always one of them. I think that Warrior system is built because you have players like Draymond with the high basketball IQ that can make plays for others and do so many different things at that 4 spot. I think people recognize that Draymond's not a go-to scorer. We saw that when Steph Curry went down a few seasons ago when the Warriors were bad and ended up getting the number 2 pick in the draft. I think if you recognize what Draymond is, and that's what you expect from him, I think that makes him properly rated. Like, Draymond is a great player for different reasons than what typically make players great.
I'm not doing it to be racist, I swear. Draymond Green. People tend to believe that he's either a Hall of Famer or a super overrated system player. I'm curious to see what you think. Well, Draymond will never be the first option, but he excels at everything else from passing to defense. Steph fans tend to downplay his skill set to make Steph look better until, of course, you mentioned the 2016 finals. Then Draymond missing one game is somehow the reason why Golden State lost 3 straight. Verdict, underrated. Legend Bugga. Derrick Rose. He had a great start to his career, but because of how fun he was to watch and how well liked,
Derrick Rose is properly rated. I think we recognize how great he could have been if it wasn't for the injuries. I think he was great, obviously, before the injuries. And I think now we recognize him as, like, a guy that has really positioned himself to be, like, a really good, like, bench player, like, role player in the NBA. That's how I view him, at least. I don't view him as like a superstar anymore. Nothing if you do, then that's on you guys. But yeah, properly rated.
He is. I feel that he's become pretty overrated. You're right. D-Rose was incredibly exciting to watch, but I don't think he deserved his MVP, and I think people really overstate how good he was before injuries because of nostalgia. He was an all-NBA caliber player, but not the top 25 to 30 player ever that some people act like he was. Verdict, overrated. Dark Rayul says, Troy Aikman, not a Hall of Fame quarterback, pedestrian numbers that was carried by every other player besides himself. I don't completely agree with that. Aikman has been decried as overrated by fans thanks to his pedestrian regular season numbers, and it is true that as far as Hall of Fame quarterbacks go, his stats are lacking, but his playoff run from 1992 to 1995, where he won 3 rings, is legitimately otherworldly amazing and largely overlooked.
Also, I think with the NBA, like with the NFL, I think that, now with how stats can be a little bit more like inflated, like scoring wise and everything, like looking back and comparing it to stats in the past in the different eras, like that can be a little misleading too.
Because of that, I can't say he's overrated. Verdict, properly rated. Hello, I am cool says
Michael
Vick. People have mixed feelings because of his jail time. Wait, Michael Vick went jail? What? But you can't forget how he changed the game. But what do you think? Well, Michael Vick is the Allen.
Man was a goat in Madden. Never really had a great throwing arm. I think maybe a little overrated, to be honest. Like, dude was a beast in Madden, but yeah, the throwing arm just never really was there.
Iverson of the NFL. He's the most exciting quarterback to ever play, but outside of a year or two, he really sucked as a passer. I think people were just so enamored with his physical skills that they overlooked his massive flaws and his fragility. My verdict, overrated. Kevin Pilati says, Julian Edelman is a good one because he is regarded as a Hall of Famer, but his overall production is so overrated. Well, Edelman was drafted into the best situation possible for a tiny white slot wide receiver, but I'll be damned if he didn't take advantage of it. No, he's not not a Hall of Famer like some say, but this motherfucker was always open on important downs in the playoffs. I can't say that's overrated. Verdict? Properly rated.
Okay.
Sawyer is cool. Justin Herbert. A lot of people think he is automatically a future first ballot Hall of Famer who is already
I don't know who this is.
But back. And on the chart, Karl Malone.
Karl
Even though
Malone.
he's always going to be an
Karl Malone as a basketball player, is underrated. Karl Malone has done a lot of garbage things off the court that I think definitely murk up people's view of him. But when it comes to the actual sport of basketball, is really damn good. I think underrated because of that.
evil guy. He did ball on the court.
Yep.
Well, we all know Malone's a piece of shit, and in my opinion, he's the biggest playoff choker in history. I will say, though, his regular season career might actually be underrated, unfortunately. But I largely think he's properly rated until MJ fans act like he's as good as Kevin Durant or Steph. Verdict, properly rated. Scott Pantera says Allen Iverson. People hold him in similar regard to guys like Kobe, Steph, and Hakeem.
Oh, man. Iverson. Okay, Iverson in the social media era, definitely would have got a lot more hate because like he was somebody, he's somebody that had like efficiency issues and stuff like that. But damn, I feel like it might be like the same mindset as like Vince Carter, where it's like my nostalgia for Iverson. I don't think he's underrated. I don't think he was quite overrated either. I think people recognize that like he got him to the finals and stuff and ran to that insane Lakers team. I think he's properly rated.
But I view him as a massively overrated chucker, similar whose only real claim to fame was his handles and his sound bites. I largely agree with that. Much like with Michael Vick, Iverson's culture impact is not overrated, but his play on the court was. He was terribly inefficient, and outside of 2001, his teams never came close to winning a title. Absolutely fun to watch.
Overrated?
Though,
Nope.
Overrated. Cinnamamba says Scottie Pippen. He gets underrated by people trying to prop MJ up.
Scottie Pippen. I think Scottie Pippen's properly rated.
Up and overrated by people trying to downplay MJ. Not really opposed it from the lease of being his own player. Well, like the question alluded to, Pippen really depends on who you talk to. He was a legitimately great player and an excellent second option who showed when MJ was off playing baseball that he could be a great first option as well. However, it is also fair to say that he wouldn't be as well known or has won any rings without Michael Jordan. In the end, I think the praise and the criticism balances out.
Yeah, you gotta look at what we see, right?
Christopher Mercer says, Donovan McNabb.
Oh, love Donovan McNabb. I still remember they had, man, who was the one receiver they had on their team? I think his name was like, could have been like Curtis or something like that. And I remember them tossing damn Hail Marys against my Lions one day, bro. McNabb, one of my favorite QBs of all time. Underrated.
Here talk about a former Eagle. Well, McNabb was my favorite player growing up and the reason why I'm an Eagles fan. As time has gone on, I think his career has been largely forgotten. He was really good to great for almost an entire decade. He just had trouble in big games, unfortunately, which prevents him from being a Hall of Famer. Verdict, properly rated. Chase Johnson, that name literally translates to porn star. Kevin Garnett, elite player, but stuck with a bad franchise.
Kevin Garnett is... While I do think the Celtics 08 ring is pretty overrated, I think they really talk it up a lot, like the big three and stuff. KG as a player, I think he's properly rated. I think when you talk about like the greatest power forward of all time, nobody's really saying that's Kevin Garnett. But you'll start talking about like the top 5, top 10, that's what people kind of have him at. I would say properly rated. He got himself the ring too, which is important. It is important.
I agree. KG.
It's what keeps a guy like Iverson from being, considered underrated or something like that. In this case, right? In this case,
for most of his prime before winning a ring, just as he started to decline. He's a legitimate all-time great. However, he is fortunate he didn't come up in the social media era, or else he would have been destroyed for his lack of playoff success with Minnesota. Verdict, properly rated. Rock Wilkin. Kawhi Leonard. People have made the argument that he has 2 Finals MVPs because of good situations rather than elite play. Well, for years.
I mean, I don't agree with that. I don't. Just based off that, I would say underrated. Like, Kawhi Leonard, man, like, when healthy, the health is an issue, but when healthy, like, Not a lot of players that you would pick over Kawhi Leonard as far as trying to lead your team to a championship, man.
Years I was on the Kawhi is overrated bandwagon, and I still think he gets overrated when people try to prop him up just to discredit LeBron. But I can't deny he is an absolutely ridiculous playoff performer when healthy, which is becoming rarer and rarer. Thank you for blowing that 3-1 lead versus Denver. Verdict? Properly rated. Okay. Your boy 73
Jerome
says,
Bettis.
I feel like Jerome Bettis would be an interesting one. I was never a fan of Bettis. He didn't run for much yards per carry. He provided nothing as a receiver, and he padded his touchdown totals with runs on the goal line. In my opinion, he does not belong in the Hall of Fame. Verdict? Overrated. Daily dose of baseball. Derek Jeter. People say he's the best shortstop of all time, but if you look closer, he's probably the 7th or 8th best. He is criminally overrated.
Properly rated.
Here, what your take is on Jeter. Jeter fluctuates between being overrated and underrated. If he didn't play in New York, he wouldn't have had the career he had or be as famous as he is. But on the other hand, he was a legitimately great player and a deserving Hall of Famer. I think, similar to Scottie Pippen, the hate and the love evens out. Verdict? Properly rated.
Good point.
Steel curtain. Tracy McGrady. T-Mac is a challenge.
All right, Tracy McGrady is underrated. He was not in the top 75. I think kind of the same song and dance as Derrick Rose, though, because like the injuries did slow him down and everything. But I do think the latter part of T-Mac's career was better than what Derrick Rose has been doing the past few seasons. The dude was still like an all-star, like on the Rockets and stuff. I'm gonna say underrated.
Childhood hero to many fans and bloggers nowadays, so he gets viewed favorably, even though if he played in the social media era, he would have gotten hell for never winning a playoff series. He was an incredible talent and a great player until injuries hit around 2005. Verdict? Properly rated. Okay. My name says Cristiano Ronaldo.
Underrated.
As everybody knows, I'm one of the most respected soccer experts of all time, and I can confidently say Cristiano Ronaldo is sexy and definitely doesn't pad his stats on penalty kick. Verdict? Properly rated and sexy. Busto 1299. Peyton Manning is not overrated. That's really all I got to say.
Yeah, I was going to say properly rated.
Verdict? Fair. Properly rated. Mojo Reds. Devin Hester. Look, you might...
Oh, man. Oh, it was my time, baby. Yo, there was no man dirtier out there than Devin Hester on a kickoff return, bro. Devin Hester, man, if you all don't think that, underrated.
I want to wear earmuffs for what I'm about to say. Devin Hester is overrated as fuck. Yes, he's the best punt returner of all time.
Yes.
Does that mean he belongs in the Hall of Fame? Absolutely not. He has fewer career touchdowns than Ted Ginn Jr. Special teams touchdowns are not worth more points than other touchdowns.
They're not, but it's still an aspect of the game where if you are the most dominant at something... Like, I feel like that at least has to be given, like, consideration. Like, every team has to do punt returns. And if you have a guy that can get you a touchdown off that and a team that can't, I think you're better because of it. But, I mean, I get what he's saying.
Verdict? Overrated. Lee Key-Bum. Hey, that is
properly
not funny.
Rated.
That is not funny. That is offensive. And honestly, I'm calling the police. But first, Kareem's resume is so godly, it's impossible for him to be overrated. But I do believe, like most older NBA legends, he benefits from a lack of scrutiny that modern-day players face. He's widely considered a top 3 player ever, and I think that's appropriate. Verdict? Properly rated.
Right,
The Sports Stop W. Tim Duncan.
Tim Duncan is one of the most underrated players in NBA history. The big fundamental up in there, man. Like, literally just the beacon of consistency and the fundamentals of basketball. Wasn't the flashiest dude out there. And, yeah, man, But Tim Duncan, if you want to win championships, it was Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan, extremely underrated.
Well, much like Kareem, Duncan's resume is so incredible, it's hard to say he's overrated, but I have constantly heard how underrated he is for years now, and it's honestly gotten annoying. The first half of his career is probably underrated, but the latter half of his career is overrated. In the end, it balances out. Verdict? Properly rated. 7 Sinful Saints. Joe Burrow. Burrow is one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. However, I do feel he was getting overrated a little bit this postseason as the Bengals had their run to the Super Bowl. And in the Super Bowl, I felt he wasted some chances to close the deal. I don't think he's better than Mahomes, Allen, or Herbert like some people do. Verdict? Overrated slightly. Cock Sneed Fartin. That is disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Shohei Ohtani. Ohtani's talent is amazing. He is great for the sport of baseball.
Underrated.
But still, thus far, he's had just one great season. I'm not going to say he's overrated, but there is pressure on him.
How do y'all play damn sports with a damn belt on? There is a few things I can do with a belt.
If he can. Verdict? Properly rated. The 360 Nate. Babe Ruth. I would like to know your opinion.
Overrated candy bar. Properly rated player.
And on him, I think he's overrated. Look, I'm not going to sit on Babe Ruth. That would be gross. But I will say Ruth is in the same category as Wilt Chamberlain and Jim Brown. His competition was weaker than later eras, that's true, but his production is so ridiculous it's impossible for him to be overrated, in my opinion. However, it is fair to wonder if he'd be as dominant in later eras. I think he would have been great regardless. Verdict, properly rated. Rams 2022 champ, OBJ. I was a huge fan of Odell when he first broke into the league, and he was legitimately incredible his first 3 seasons. However, since 2017, he's dealt with injuries, and even when he's been on the field, he hasn't come close to living up to his superstar status. He's a great number 2 receiver, though. Verdict, overrated. Coffee black, Steph Curry. Steph Curry properly is not overrated until the moment his delusional ass fan base inevitably tries to put him in LeBron's class. I think he's a top 7 to 8 player ever, and capable of blowing games open better than anybody I've ever seen. But his resume requires more context than any other all-time great, plus he's a massive front runner. Verdict, properly rated. HBG 313, LeBron. LeBron's a top 2 basketball player ever, and easily the most hated player ever. He's not overrated. In fact, I would say at times it's the opposite. Verdict, underrated. Kyler Schmutzler, Tom Brady. Barry, you already know. Well, several months ago, I finally relented and called Brady the GOAT, and unfortunately, I still think that. I also still believe he's been otherworldly lucky in high leverage moments more than any other all-time great quarterback to win as many rings as he has. Is it possible for a player to be both overrated
put yourself into lucky situations?
I say yes. Verdict, overrated, but still the GOAT, unfortunately. And finally, Michael Jordan. Surprisingly, nobody brought up MJ, but I couldn't leave him out. He's a top 2 player ever and was the clear-cut GOAT before LeBron showed up. I still go back and forth between him and LBJ as the GOAT, but at the same time, his fans act like he was flawless and never lost. Is he overrated? Not unless you think he's leaps and bounds above LeBron. Verdict, properly rated.
All right, that was so much fun. I enjoyed the hell out of that. That's all we got. Thank you all so much for watching. Peace out, my friends.